Black's bishop is dangerously placed, and White's queen is in a very vulnerable position. White has to be aware of a potential discovery check. Bishop h2 check, losing the queen to a discovery. And that is why White plays the queen to f2. And after queen to f2, offering the trade of queens, Black declines the trade but moves the queen to e4. Here it appears that Black is declining the trade of queens, but is in fact threatening bishop h2 check, followed by queen takes e3. So rook to f1. Right from this position, Black has 3 tries. But first, the main move is bishop to g7. And then the second try is bishop to h2 check. And the last try is queen captures bishop on e3. We're going to take a look at all 3. And we're going to look at bishop to h2 check first. If bishop h2 check, then king takes h2, and after queen takes e3, White has queen f7 check, and after king h8, queen takes pawn on c7. Now let's take a look at queen captures bishop on e3. If queen takes e3, queen takes e3, and after bishop h2 check, the correct move for White is king to f2. And White wins the exchange. Now let's consider bishop to g7 instead. So taking the moves back, in this position, Black plays the bishop back to g7. And now queen to f7 check with a gain of tempo, and after king to h8, rook e1. Black regains the tempo, queen back, and after rook e5, this allows bishop to f2, defending the rook on e1. Now the focus of attention is the pawn structures on the queen side. And here it's just a matter of tricky tactics. Bishop to e3, rook takes, then Black loses the queen, so queen to e4, bishop f2. And White successfully sidesteps the pins. Now it's time to go directly into an endgame. So who's going to win the endgame? Bishop to e5, queen e3, bishop takes g3 check, recapturing with the king, and after queen to e5 check, now we have an endgame. And here White has a 4-3 queenside pawn majority. White follows the endgame principle to keep the king in front of the pawns, advance the king, and after these moves, White will bring home the point.
How does one achieve chess excellence?
First, we begin with the opening. Play the opening like a book. Until you get to the middle game, play the opening like a book. And once you get to the middle game, you play the middle game like a magician. And this is the basic opening position that we will work from. The opening phase is done. Now it's time for middle game planning. Play the middle game like a magician. Now it's time to move on to the next game, the next lesson on positional play. Before we go on, I want to ask an interesting question. Let's consider three strong chess engines: Stockfish, Komodo Dragon, and AlphaZero. If Stockfish and Komodo Dragon were to team up against AlphaZero in a chess match, would AlphaZero be able to defeat Stockfish and Komodo put together? It's difficult to predict the clear winner, but Stockfish and Komodo combined together against AlphaZero would pose an interesting challenge. Now let's begin our lesson on positional play. In the following position, Black wants to create counterplay on the queen's side. So plays the bishop to e7, creating a double threat on the pawn on b4, but rook on a to b1 defends. a5 adds more pressure. White has 3 tries from this position. The main move would be to capture the pawn on a5. B captures a5. And then you have the other move to defend the pawn with a3, or to go for a minority attack by advancing the pawn to the b5 square. But if pawn to a3, then after a takes b4, we're going to see all three. We're going to take a look at all three. But this is the minority attack, advancing the pawn to b5. So let's take the move back now. If White plays, for example, after a5, pawn to b5, minority attack. Then after the minority attack, then Black can play c5 in response. So the idea here is to get good counterplay on the queen's side after pawn to c5. And this threatens pawn to c4. The next one we're going to look at is pawn to a3 by White defending the pawn instead. So here, if White plays a3, then Black can simply capture on b4. A takes b4, A takes b, and after b5, now Black has knight from b6 to c4 with an excellent post for Black on the queen side. So now this leaves us with the main try. B captures pawn on a5, and Black recaptures with the rook. Capturing with the pawn will lose the bishop, I guess. And now after pawn to a4, which is a good move for White, this stops the rook from going to a3 to harass the queen. And rook to e8. And at some point, White will be looking to advance the e4 pawn. And that is known as the thematic push in the center. So bishop to f1. And then bishop to f8. But let's take a move back and look at knight to e5 by White. Knight to e5 would probably be a good move for White here. And Black will have to consider defending the pawn on b6 with the move bishop d8, which defends the pawn on b6. So now the move here for White is queen to c2. More of a waiting move, and also preparing to push the e4 pawn. It's the viable plan for white. Queen c2 with pawn to e4. But for example, if white plays knight to e5 here, and we're going to take a look at it. So if not queen c2, then knight e5, knight takes on e5, knight takes e5 followed by pawn takes e5. And after queen recaptures, then queen takes pawn on b6, and this will fork the rook and the bishop. So again, the issue with black is the weakness of the pawn on b6. However, an exchange sacrifice may be the solution. Rook captures, and after d takes e, queen takes e5, and this will leave black with the 2 bishop advantage, a static advantage for the endgame. And black will follow up with bishop to d6, creating a battery on the h2 to b8 diagonal. So here, white continues with queen c2, preparing the e4 push. Queen to c2, and now g6 by black, with the idea of playing the bishop to g7 to increase control or maintain control of e5, keeping an eye on the e file. And now e4, bishop g7 allows pawn to e5 with tempo. So let's take back black's last move. If d captures on e4 instead, then knight captures on e4, and white's idea is to attack along these 2 diagonals. Queen f4, and now the move is bishop to c4, bishop to g7. Now an excellent move here for white will be a knight on e4 to d2. Knight on e4 to d2 with the threat of rook capturing on e8, and also capturing on g6 with the queen, and the pawn on f7 cannot recapture because it is pinned by the bishop on c4. For example, the trade on e1, and the e file is open for white, and black here would try to trade off white's strong bishop on the diagonal. But here in this position, after bishop g7, rook e2, and pawn to c5 with 3 hits on the knight on e4. And this is the logical move, pawn to d5, and rook from e to a8 with a battery on the a file. And black keeps an eye on the e5 square and the e file itself. So if going back, and if bishop g7, if black continues with bishop to g7, then pawn to e5, and from this position black has 3 tries. Black has queen to b8, queen to c7, and queen to e6. And we're going to take a look at all 3. So what happens if the queen goes to c7? Queen to c7 allows the tactical knight to b5. And this would enable black to place the knight on d6, hitting both the bishop and the rook on e8. Now let's analyze queen e6. Queen e6, now black has knight e2, eyeing the f4 square. So queen to f5, offering the trade of queens. White accepts the trade. And now knight h4, rook captures pawn on a4, knight captures pawn on f5. Bishop f8 to stop the knight from resting on d6. Knight to f4. And white has the idea of playing the pawn from e5 to e6 with pressure. Now taking the moves back, we're going to look at the main move, which is queen to b8. So from here, queen to b8, and now white has the tactical pawn to e6 move. This is an excellent move for white because if pawn on f takes pawn on e6, then queen takes pawn on g6. F takes e6, queen takes g6, and now this exploits the weakness of the e6 pawn. So now we are at the last 5 minutes of the video. 5 minutes left. And what we're going to do for this final lesson is to simply watch Leela Zero play the black side. So now this is an exercise for you for this last part. I want you to think about or try to figure out what the strategy was for both sides, and then pay attention to the tactics. And if you want to, you can trace back and just copy these moves down, and you could try to replay the moves on your chessboard and compare your moves to the engine's moves to see what your errors were. But until then, or until next time, I want you to stay tuned. Thank you for watching. Please don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. My next video will be Fantasy Chess Island Part 2. You've probably already seen Part 1. If you're playing white in this position, be watchful because black's knights are very active and they're dangerously placed.